The millionaire falls in love with a single mother. But just as he's ready to build a future with her, she drops a bombshell. "You are my son's father." Stunned, he struggles to believe it, convinced she's after his fortune. But when his own past resurfaces, revealing the truth he never saw coming, everything he thought he knew is shattered. Now, faced with a choice between love and fear, will he fight for the family he never knew, or walk away forever? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. Charles Reed straightened his tie as he stepped out of his sleek black rental car. The summer breeze carried the scent of pine and lake water, familiar yet distant memories from a childhood he'd left behind. Lakeside Resort stood before him, its weathered charm at odds with the polished luxury properties that had built his reputation. "Mr. Reed, welcome back to Pine Grove." The resort manager, a balding man with an eager smile, rushed forward with an extended hand. "We're honored to have you consider our humble property." Charles offered a firm handshake and a practiced smile. "Thomas, good to see you again. The place looks quaint." Quaint was generous. The resort had potential. Prime lakefront location, sprawling grounds, historical architecture. But years of neglect had taken their toll. Peeling paint, outdated furnishings, and tired landscaping told the story of a once grand destination fading into irrelevance. Perfect for acquisition, perfect for transformation. "Let me show you around," Thomas said, gesturing toward the main building. "We've maintained the classic charm while making modest updates where the budget allowed." Charles nodded, mentally cataloging everything that would need to be gutted and replaced. His vision for Lakeside Resort involved glass and steel, sleek modernism that would attract wealthy weekenders from the city. Nothing would remain of this outdated relic except the name and location. The tour proceeded predictably, dated lobby, tired guest rooms, uninspired amenities, until Thomas brightened noticeably. "And now for our crown jewel," he announced, leading Charles toward double doors at the back of the main building. "Lakeside Bistro, the one part of the resort that's actually turning a profit. Our head chef has earned quite a following." The restaurant was a surprise. Unlike the rest of the property, it hummed with energy. Every table was occupied despite the early dinner hour. The space featured rustic wood beams and stone accents that somehow felt timeless rather than outdated. Large windows framed spectacular lake views, and delicious aromas filled the air. "This wasn't in the property photos," Charles noted, genuinely impressed despite himself. Thomas beamed. "Chef Vega transformed this space 3 years ago. Farm-to-table concept, all local ingredients. She's been written up in regional magazines. People drive hours just to eat here." Charles's business mind immediately assessed the opportunity. "Interesting, though it doesn't quite fit the ultra-luxury concept I'm envisioning. We'd likely rebrand with a celebrity chef partnership." A crash of metal against tile interrupted the conversation. Charles turned to see a woman standing in the doorway to the kitchen, a dropped serving spoon at her feet. Her dark eyes flashed with unmistakable anger. "So you're the corporate raider," she said, her voice low but carrying enough intensity to turn heads at nearby tables. She bent to retrieve the spoon without breaking eye contact. Charles found himself momentarily speechless, unusual for a man who negotiated multi-million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. The woman was striking, not in a polished, cosmopolitan way, but with a natural beauty enhanced by the passion evident in her expression. Her chef's coat was immaculate despite the dinner rush, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. "Sienna, this is Charles Reed," Thomas stammered, clearly uncomfortable. "Mr. Reed, this is Sienna Vega, our executive chef." "I heard everything you said," Sienna stated flatly. "Celebrity chef partnership? You haven't even tasted my food." Charles recovered his composure, intrigued by her boldness. "I don't need to taste it to know that rebranding would be necessary for the direction I'm taking the property." "The direction you're taking?" Sienna's eyebrow arched. You don't own Lakeside yet. It's merely a matter of paperwork at this point, Charles replied smoothly. Then allow me to serve you dinner before you decide to dismantle what I've built. Her tone made it clear this wasn't a request. You owe me that much. Something about her fierce determination resonated with Charles in unexpected ways. He recognized in her the same drive that had propelled him from nothing to empire. I can spare an hour, he conceded. Thomas, please seat Mr. Reed at table 9, Sienna instructed before disappearing into the kitchen. As Charles took his seat by the window, he found himself genuinely looking forward to the meal and to learning more about the passionate chef who seemed unintimidated by his reputation or wealth. She's a single mother, you know, Thomas mentioned quietly as he poured water. Raised her boy while building this restaurant from nothing. The staff adores her. Charles felt an unexpected pang. Something about Sienna Vega stirred emotions he rarely experienced in business dealings: respect, curiosity, and an inexplicable connection he couldn't quite name. For 3 days straight, Charles found reasons to return to Lakeside Bistro. First, it was to sample more of the menu. Then he needed to understand the restaurant's operations for his business assessment. By the 3rd evening, even he struggled to manufacture a plausible excuse. Back again, Mr. Reed? Sienna asked, wiping her hands on a towel as she emerged from the kitchen. Her tone remained professional, but he detected a hint of amusement in her eyes. The food is exceptional, he admitted. It wasn't a lie. Her cooking had genuinely impressed him, with flavors both sophisticated and comforting. High praise from someone planning to replace me with a celebrity chef. She raised an eyebrow, but there was less hostility than before. Charles winced. I may have been premature in that assessment. A small victory smile flickered across her face before she composed herself. Your usual table is ready. As the restaurant emptied after the dinner rush, Charles lingered over his coffee. He watched Sienna move through the dining room, checking in with the last few customers. Her movements efficient, yet graceful. When she approached his table, he surprised himself by asking, "Do you ever take a break?" Not often, she admitted. Single mom, remember? This restaurant is our livelihood. Join me, he offered, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. The staff seems to have everything under control. Sienna hesitated, then glanced at her watch. I suppose I could sit for a few minutes. 1 glass of wine turned into 2 as the restaurant closed around them. The staff quietly finished cleaning, leaving them alone in the dimly lit dining room. So how does someone go from nothing to owning a hotel empire by 35? Sienna asked, studying him with genuine curiosity. Charles rarely discussed his background, preferring to let his success speak for itself, but something about Sienna's direct gaze made him want to share. Determination, long hours, some luck, he began, then surprised himself by continuing. And growing up watching my mother clean other people's hotel rooms while we barely made rent. Sienna's expression softened. That doesn't fit the silver spoon image you project. That's rather the point, he admitted with a small smile. Your turn. How does someone become an acclaimed chef in a small-town resort? Culinary school scholarships, working double shifts. Some luck, she echoed his words with a smile. And discovering that food was the one thing that made sense when everything else in life felt chaotic. Their conversation flowed naturally as they discovered shared experiences, the drive to prove themselves, the satisfaction of creating something from nothing, the loneliness that sometimes accompanied success. What about your son's father? Charles asked carefully. Is he in the picture? Sienna's expression closed immediately. Number, it's just Parker and me. She quickly redirected. What about you? No wife waiting in some penthouse. No, Charles replied. Work became my relationship, easier that way. Easier, maybe, but not always better, Sienna said softly. When she reached for the wine bottle, their fingers brushed. The contact lingered, neither pulling away immediately. Charles felt an unexpected jolt of connection that went beyond physical attraction. Sienna's eyes met his, suggesting she felt it too, before she gently withdrew her hand. The moment was interrupted by Sienna's phone buzzing. She checked it and frowned. "Everything okay?" Charles asked. "My babysitter just canceled for tomorrow night. I have a major catering event at the mayor's house. It could bring in significant business." She bit her lip. "I'll have to figure something out." The words left Charles's mouth before he could analyze them. "I could help." Sienna stared at him. "You're offering to babysit?" "I could supervise," he suggested, surprising himself with the offer. How hard could it be? "You've never spent time with an 8-year-old boy, have you?" Sienna laughed, but her expression turned thoughtful. "Are you serious?" "Completely," Charles said, realizing he meant it. "Consider it my contribution to local business development." Sienna studied him for a long moment. "Parker is very particular about who he spends time with." "Let me meet him. If he hates me, you can find another solution." "You really aren't what I expected, Charles Reed," Sienna said quietly. As they stood to leave, their hands brushed again. This time, neither pretended it was accidental. Next day, Charles stood on Sienna's front porch, holding a small model airplane kit he'd impulsively purchased on the way over. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt nervous meeting someone, certainly not an 8-year-old, but his palms were inexplicably damp as he rang the doorbell. The door swung open to reveal a serious-faced boy with striking blue eyes that widened slightly at the sight of Charles in his casual weekend attire. Jeans and a button-down shirt instead of his usual suit. "You must be Mr. Reed," the boy said formally, extending his hand. "I'm Parker Vega." Charles found himself momentarily speechless as he shook the small hand. Something about the child's direct gaze and composed demeanor felt oddly familiar. "Just Charles is fine," he managed, handing over the gift. "I thought you might like this." Parker examined the box with analytical precision. A 1947 Beechcraft Bonanza. Excellent choice. The V-tail design was revolutionary. Charles blinked in surprise. "You know your aircraft." "I read a lot." Parker shrugged, but a small smile crept onto his face. "Do you like planes too?" "I built models with my grandfather when I was about your age," Charles admitted. "It's how I learned patience." Sienna appeared behind her son, dressed elegantly for her catering event. "I see you two have met," she said, looking between them with an unreadable expression. "We're going to build a plane," Parker announced, his previous reserve melting slightly. "After the park," Sienna reminded him, then turned to Charles. "Emergency numbers are on the fridge. He's had dinner but can have a small snack later. Bedtime is—" "Mom," Parker interrupted with an eye roll that was pure preteen exasperation. "I can tell him all that. We'll be fine." Charles caught Sienna's eye and nodded reassuringly. "We'll be fine," he echoed. At the park, Charles watched Parker methodically tackle the playground equipment, approaching each structure with careful consideration before attempting it. The boy didn't rush headlong like the other children, but assessed, planned, then executed, a miniature strategist at play. "That's exactly what I used to do," Charles murmured to himself, startled by the parallel. Later, as they sat on a bench sharing ice cream cones, Charles noticed how Parker tilted his head slightly when considering a question, the same gesture Charles made during business negotiations. "Why do you want to change my mom's restaurant?" Parker asked suddenly, fixing those eerily familiar blue eyes on Charles. Charles nearly choked on his ice cream. "What makes you think I want to change it?" "I overheard Mom talking to Aunt Elena," Parker said, methodically licking his cone to prevent drips. "She said you want to make it into something different." The directness of the question, delivered without accusation but with clear purpose, caught Charles off guard. It was exactly how he approached difficult subjects himself. "I'm reconsidering those plans," Charles admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. "Good," Parker nodded decisively. "Mom's food makes people happy. That's important." Back at Sienna's modest home, they worked on the model airplane together at the kitchen table. Charles found himself enchanted by Parker's focused determination and thoughtful questions. The boy possessed an old soul quality that resonated deeply with him. "You hold the pieces just like I do," Parker observed, watching Charles's hands. Charles glanced down, noticing how they both positioned their fingers in the same precise way. A strange sensation washed over him, a connection he couldn't explain. Later that night, after Parker was asleep, Charles pulled out his tablet and began sketching alternative renovation plans for the resort. His original concept had called for gutting the existing restaurant to create a sleek, modern dining space with a celebrity chef partnership. Now, his fingers moved across the screen, preserving the heart of Sienna's kitchen while enhancing the surrounding areas. His phone buzzed with a message from Victor, the board chairman. "Team needs final plans by Friday. Investors eager to move forward with original concept." Charles stared at the message, then at his new sketches. The business case was clear. The original plan promised higher returns and aligned with his brand's luxury positioning. Yet as he looked around Sienna's home, at the photographs of her and Parker on the walls, at the well-worn cookbooks lining the shelves, something inside him shifted. For the first time in his career, the clear business decision didn't feel like the right one. When Sienna returned later that evening, she found Charles asleep on her couch, his tablet open to the new designs, and Parker's completed model airplane displayed proudly on the coffee table. Weeks have passed, and their relationship deepens. The lakeside sunsets had become Charles's favorite part of the day. Leaning against the resort's balcony railing, he watched Sienna directing her kitchen staff through the large windows of her restaurant. In just a few weeks, she had transformed from adversary to something he'd never expected, someone essential. "Beautiful view," said Victor, appearing beside him. Charles nodded, his eyes never leaving Sienna. "The best." "I meant the lake," Victor said with a knowing smile. "The board's impressed with your redesign. Keeping the restaurant was unexpected, but your expansion concept is brilliant." "It just made sense," Charles replied, remembering Parker's words about his mother's food making people happy. Later that evening, Charles led Sienna along the boardwalk toward the pier, her hand warm in his. "Where are we going?" she asked, laughing as he tugged her forward. "You'll see." At the end of the pier, Charles had arranged a small table with candles and a bottle of champagne, but instead of menus, there were blueprints weighted down with stones. "What's this?" Sienna asked, her fingers tracing the detailed drawings. "Your new kitchen," Charles said quietly. "Triple the size, with a chef's table overlooking the water, and a garden terrace for seasonal ingredients." Sienna's eyes widened as she took in the plans. "Charles, this isn't what we discussed. This is so much more. I'm not just preserving your restaurant, Sienna. I'm making it the centerpiece of the new resort." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "You've changed how I see this project. How I see everything, really." Tears glistened in her eyes. "Why would you do this?" "Because your passion deserves to be showcased, not dismantled." His hand found her cheek. "And because I've never met anyone like you." Under the canopy of stars, with the lake lapping gently against the pier, Charles leaned in. Their lips met in a kiss that felt both inevitable and surprising. Gentle at first, then deepening with weeks of built-up tension. When they finally broke apart, Sienna's eyes remained closed for a moment, as if memorizing the feeling. "Let's walk," she whispered. They strolled along the moonlit shore, shoes dangling from their fingers, the cool water occasionally washing over their feet. Charles had never felt so at peace, so present in a moment. "I never expected this," Sienna admitted, squeezing his hand. "You were supposed to be the corporate raider who'd destroy everything I'd built." Charles laughed. "And you were supposed to be a minor obstacle to my development plans." "What happens after tomorrow's signing?" she asked, her voice suddenly serious. "We celebrate," he said simply. "And then we figure out what comes next, together." Sienna stopped walking, her expression shifting to something more complex, vulnerability mixed with resolution. "There's something you need to know first," she said. "Something I should have told you weeks ago." Back at her home with Parker asleep down the hall, Sienna's hands trembled as she pulled a small photo album from her bookshelf. "9 years ago," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was catering a charity event in Miami. It was my first major solo contract." Charles nodded, sensing the importance of whatever she was about to share. "After the event, the client was so pleased they invited me to celebrate at a club opening." She opened the album to a marked page. This was taken that night. Charles stared at the photograph. A younger Sienna, her hair longer, laughing beside a man whose face was partially turned away, but unmistakably him. "I don't remember," he said, confusion clouding his features. "I was there for a business deal closing. We celebrated too hard. I barely remember that whole weekend. We met at the bar. We talked for hours about food and travel and dreams." Sienna's voice wavered. "One night, that's all it was. When I found out I was pregnant, I tried to reach you, but your family office said you weren't interested and offered settlement money." Charles looked up sharply. "I never knew. They never told me." "I refused the money," Sienna continued. "I didn't want anything except for my child to know his father." The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. Parker's familiar blue eyes, his mannerisms, the analytical mind that mirrored Charles's own. "Parker," Charles whispered, his world tilting on its axis. "Parker is my son." Charles stared at the photograph, his entire body turning cold. The room seemed to tilt as his eyes darted between the image and Sienna's face. Parker was his son. His son. The words echoed in his mind but refused to settle into anything resembling reality. "This can't be right," he said, his voice hollow. "I wouldn't lie about this, Charles." Sienna's eyes pleaded with him. "Look at him. Look at yourself in him." Charles stood abruptly, the photo album sliding from his lap to the floor. 9 years. You've kept this from me for 9 years. I tried to reach you. And then what? His voice rose sharply. You just happened to be working at the exact resort I decided to buy? That's quite a coincidence, isn't it? Sienna flinched. I didn't know you were coming. How could I possibly have known? But Charles was already piecing together a different narrative, one where he wasn't a man discovering his child, but a wealthy target being manipulated. The timing, the connection he'd felt with Parker, Sienna's initial resistance followed by warming. It all suddenly seemed calculated. Is that why you fought so hard for the restaurant? To ensure I'd notice you? His words came out cold and precise. Was getting close to me part of the plan all along? That's not fair, Sienna whispered, tears streaming down her face. I never planned any of this. Yet here we are. Charles grabbed his jacket. With you revealing a son, just as I'm about to sign a multi-million-dollar deal that would benefit you directly. Charles, please. I need to go. He moved toward the door, unable to look at her. Don't contact me. My lawyer will be in touch. The door closed behind him with a quiet click that belied the earthquake happening inside him. Charles drove back to his hotel in a fog, fragments of that night in Miami flashing through his mind. Champagne flowing after closing his first major deal, the crowded club, a beautiful woman with an infectious laugh. But the details were blurred, lost to the celebration and excessive drinking that had marked that weekend. Back in his suite, Charles paced like a caged animal. He grabbed his phone and dialed. "Vincent, I need you here. Now." 30 minutes later, Vincent Chambers sat across from Charles, his expression grave as he listened to the story. "This is textbook opportunism," Vincent said when Charles finished. "The timing is too convenient." "But the boy," Charles hesitated. "Parker looks like me. Acts like me." Vincent's eyes narrowed. "A paternity test is our first step, but even if biology confirms it, her intentions are suspect. Why reveal this now? Why not when you first arrived? She claims she tried to contact me years ago and conveniently received no response," Vincent scoffed. "We'll investigate that claim thoroughly. In the meantime, no contact with either of them, no changes to the resort plans. We proceed as if this revelation never happened." Over the next 3 days, Charles became a ghost in the resort. He canceled meetings, avoided the restaurant, and instructed the staff to deny Sienna if she came looking for him. Vincent launched a comprehensive investigation, dispatching a team to gather information on Sienna's background and verify her story about attempting to contact Charles. Alone in his suite, Charles found himself standing at the window, staring at the lake where he and Sienna had walked just days before. His mind was a battlefield of conflicting emotions: anger at what felt like betrayal, confusion about his missing memories, and a profound sense of loss for both the relationship that had been growing and the years with his son he could never recover. He picked up his phone, scrolling to a picture he'd taken of Parker at the park. The boy's serious expression, the analytical tilt of his head as he considered the chess pieces, it was like looking at himself as a child. 9 years, he whispered to the empty room. 9 years gone. Vincent entered Charles's suite with the confident stride of a man who'd found exactly what he was looking for. He placed a tablet on the coffee table and slid it toward Charles. "She knew," Vincent said, his voice clinically detached. "Sienna Vega researched you extensively before you ever set foot in this town." Charles stared at the screen. Browser history from Sienna's work computer showed searches for his name, his company, and his recent acquisitions dating back 3 weeks before his arrival. "She also made several calls to your corporate office in the months before you came," Vincent continued. "And there's more. She adjusted the restaurant's menu to include dishes similar to ones you've praised in interviews. The woman was setting a trap, Charles." Charles felt ice forming around his heart. "You're certain?" "The evidence is irrefutable." Vincent's thin smile held no warmth. "She knew exactly who you were and what you represented. The tearful revelation about your supposed son. Perfect timing to secure her position before the contract signing." Charles stood, rage and hurt crystallizing into something hard and cold. "I want to see her. Now." "Charles, I strongly advise." "Now, Vincent." 30 minutes later, Charles strode through the resort's main dining room where Sienna was overseeing lunch service. The restaurant was nearly full, with resort guests and locals enjoying their meals. "Perfect." "Sienna," he called, his voice carrying across the room. Conversations quieted as heads turned. She looked up, relief washing over her face. "Charles, thank God. I've been trying to reach you." "You've been trying to reach me for a long time, haven't you?" His words cut like glass. "Since well before I arrived in town." Sienna paled. "What are you talking about?" "You researched me, called my office, tailored your menu to my tastes." Each accusation landed like a physical blow. "You knew exactly who I was when I walked through that door the first time." The dining room had gone completely silent. Staff members froze in place. Diners stared openly at the unfolding drama. "That's not—" "I can explain," Sienna stammered, her voice small. "Explain how you manipulated me, how you used your son, who may or may not be mine, as leverage to secure your position here." Charles's voice rose. "Was anything between us real, or was it all part of your scheme?" Tears welled in Sienna's eyes. "Please, not here. We can talk privately. I'm done with your private conversations and convenient revelations." Charles turned to address the stunned onlookers. "Ms. Vega here has been orchestrating an elaborate con. As of this moment, she is no longer employed by this resort." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Sienna stood frozen, humiliation and devastation washing over her face. "My legal team will be contacting you regarding the paternity claim," Charles continued coldly. "In the meantime, I suggest you clear out your belongings immediately." He turned and walked away, ignoring the whispers that erupted behind him. Vincent fell into step beside him, a satisfied smile playing at his lips. "That was perhaps more public than I would have advised," Vincent said, "but effective, nonetheless." Charles said nothing, the momentary satisfaction of his outburst already curdling into something ugly in his stomach. Later that evening, Sienna stood alone in her kitchen. No, not her kitchen anymore. She ran her fingers along the stainless steel counters where she had created countless dishes, built her reputation, and supported her son. Her chef's knives were packed in their roll, her personal recipe books boxed up. 8 years of her life dismantled in an afternoon. The news had spread through the small town like wildfire. Former colleagues had averted their eyes as she packed her things. Her phone had been buzzing with messages from people who'd witnessed her public humiliation or heard about it secondhand. Finally alone, Sienna sank to the floor, her back against the industrial refrigerator, and broke. Sobs tore through her body as she hugged her knees to her chest. How would she support Parker now? How could she face the community that had just watched her being branded a manipulative liar? Meanwhile, Charles sat in his suite, staring at nothing. Despite his anger, his mind kept returning to Parker. The serious way the boy had studied the chessboard, head tilted slightly to the right, exactly as Charles did when considering a complex problem. The methodical way Parker had organized the chess pieces before they began playing. The flash of analytical insight when he'd spotted a move Charles hadn't anticipated. Small moments, insignificant on their own, but together they formed a pattern that Vincent's neat narrative couldn't explain away. Charles pulled out his phone and scrolled to a childhood photo his mother had sent years ago. The resemblance between him at 8 and Parker was undeniable. For the first time since Sienna's revelation, doubt crept into Charles's mind. What if Vincent was wrong? What if he had just publicly destroyed the mother of his child? Charles stood at the airport gate, checking his watch for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. His grandmother's flight was on time, but his thoughts were miles away, back at the resort, replaying his public confrontation with Sienna. The gnawing doubt hadn't subsided in the 3 days since. "Charles, darling." He turned to see Eleanora Reed approaching, elegant as always in a tailored traveling suit, her silver hair swept into a perfect chignon. Despite being in her 70s, she moved with the grace and energy of a much younger woman. "Grandmother." He embraced her, inhaling her familiar scent of Chanel No. 5. "How was your flight?" "Perfectly adequate. Now tell me, why do you look like you haven't slept in days?" Her piercing blue eyes, the same shade as his own, studied him with unsettling perception. "Just business matters. Nothing for you to worry about." She patted his cheek. "I've known you since you were in diapers, Charles. That's your guilty face." He forced a smile. "Let's get you settled at the resort." Later that afternoon, Charles took Eleanora for a tour of the small town. As they strolled through the main square, his grandmother suddenly stopped, her attention caught by something across the street. "Charles, who is that child?" she asked sharply. Charles followed her gaze and felt his heart drop. Parker sat on a bench outside the ice cream shop, looking smaller and more solemn than Charles remembered. Sienna stood nearby, speaking with someone, probably arranging new employment, he realized with a stab of guilt. "That's no one. Just a local family," he said, attempting to steer his grandmother in another direction. Eleonora remained rooted to the spot. That boy is the spitting image of you at that age. The way he's sitting, even the way he's eating that ice cream. Methodical, one careful bite at a time. That was you, Charles. Grandmother, please. Who is he? Her tone left no room for evasion. Charles sighed. His name is Parker. He might be my son. Eleonora's eyes widened. Might be? Charles Reed, what have you done? Over coffee at a quiet cafe, Charles reluctantly shared the whole story. Meeting Sienna at the resort, their growing connection, her revelation about Parker, and his subsequent public humiliation of her. When he finished, Eleonora sat in stunned silence for a moment before speaking. I have never been more disappointed in you. The words cut deeper than Charles expected. You publicly humiliated that woman? The mother of your child? I don't know for certain Don't insult my intelligence, Eleonora snapped. I saw him with my own eyes. That boy is a Reed, no question about it. She shook her head in disgust. Your grandfather would be ashamed. We raised you better than this. Charles stared into his coffee. Vincent found evidence she knew who I was before I arrived. She was trying to manipulate me. And did your Vincent investigate why she might have sought you out? Did it occur to you she might have tried to find you when she discovered she was pregnant? The question landed like a blow. It hadn't occurred to him. I want the full story, Charles, not just the convenient parts your lawyer fed you. That evening, after settling his grandmother in her suite, Charles made a call he'd been avoiding. I need all the information on Sienna Vega, he told his assistant. Everything, including any contacts she might have attempted with me or my office in the past. The files arrived by secure email the next morning. Charles sat alone in his office, scrolling through document after document. What he found made him physically ill. 9 years ago, a pregnant Sienna had indeed tried to contact him, repeatedly. His family office, tasked with screening his communications during that busy period of his career, had dismissed her as an opportunist. They'd offered her a substantial settlement in exchange for her silence and a waiver of all paternity claims. The final document was her response, a handwritten letter refusing the money, stating she wanted nothing from him but acknowledgement of his child. She would raise the baby herself rather than accept what she called hush money. The letter had never reached Charles. His staff had handled it, just as they'd been instructed to handle all potential complications to his rising career. Charles closed his laptop, a crushing weight of shame settling over him. He had built systems to insulate himself from inconveniences, never considering the human cost. And Sienna, proud, principled Sienna, had chosen to raise their son alone rather than accept money without recognition. He had been so terribly, catastrophically wrong. Charles sat at his desk, staring at the evidence of his terrible mistake. The weight of what he'd done, not just to Sienna, but to his own son, pressed down on him until he could barely breathe. He'd accused her of manipulation when she had been the one wronged. He'd humiliated her publicly when she had spent years protecting their child with quiet dignity. What have I done? He whispered to the empty room. The next morning, Charles drove through town, his mind churning with thoughts of how to make amends. As he passed Main Street, he noticed Sienna through the window of Dottie's diner. She wore a pale blue uniform instead of her chef's whites, carrying plates to a table with the same grace she'd once used to present her gourmet creations. The sight struck him like a physical blow. He pulled over and watched as she worked, her face composed but missing the spark of passion he'd seen when she was in her own kitchen. This was his doing. He had taken everything from her. He entered the diner, the bell above the door announcing his arrival. When Sienna looked up and saw him, her expression hardened instantly. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice professionally distant as she approached his table, order pad in hand. "Sienna, I need to talk to you." "I'm working." She gestured to the half-full diner. Coffee? Please, just 5 minutes. You said everything you needed to say at the resort, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. In front of everyone, remember? The shame of that moment washed over him again. I was wrong, completely wrong. A flicker of something, pain perhaps, crossed her face before she masked it. Your coffee will be right up, sir. She walked away, her back straight with pride despite everything. Charles left a large tip and his business card with his personal number written on the back. She never called. Over the next few days, Charles learned more about Sienna's situation. The resort's new management had blacklisted her, claiming she'd created a hostile environment. No restaurant in town would hire her. The diner job paid barely enough for her to make rent. She's too proud to leave town, Mrs. Holloway at the local bakery told him when he stopped in. Says this is Parker's home, and she won't uproot him. Parker. The thought of his son, there was no doubt in Charles's mind now, made his chest ache. The boy who shared his analytical mind and serious expressions. The child who had looked at him with such open curiosity. Charles tried again at the diner, and again Sienna refused to speak with him. After his third attempt, the owner asked him not to return. You're making my waitress uncomfortable, she said firmly. Whatever happened between you two, she doesn't want to talk about it. That night, Charles couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about what his grandmother had said. That boy is a Reed. His son, his responsibility. He'd missed 8 years already. He couldn't miss any more. Understanding dawned slowly. Sienna's reluctance wasn't just about her wounded pride. She was protecting Parker from him. From a wealthy, powerful man who might use his resources to take her child away. Her silence wasn't deception. It was maternal protection. In the quiet of his hotel room, Charles wrote a letter. Not to Sienna, but to Parker. He poured his heart onto the page, explaining how much their time together had meant to him, how he treasured their conversations about buildings and business. He wrote about the strange, immediate connection he'd felt with Parker from their first meeting. A connection he now understood. He promised he would never disappear from Parker's life again, if given the chance. The next morning, Charles placed the sealed envelope in Sienna's mailbox, marked with Parker's name. Sienna found it that afternoon. She sat at her kitchen table, turning the envelope over in her hands, recognizing Charles's bold handwriting. She knew she should throw it away, protect her son from more disappointment. But she remembered Parker's questions. Why doesn't Mr. Reed come around anymore? Did I do something wrong? She held the letter, torn between her instinct to shield her child and the knowledge that Parker deserved to know his father wanted to be in his life. The sky darkened ominously as Sienna finished her shift at the diner. Black clouds rolled in from the coast, and the wind had picked up considerably since morning. The local radio station had been broadcasting storm warnings all day, and now evacuation orders were being issued for homes along the shoreline. You better get home quick, Dottie said, flipping the sign to closed as the last customers hurried out. They're saying it could be the worst storm in a decade. Sienna nodded, gathering her things. Parker's probably worried. He hates thunderstorms. She drove home through streets that were already beginning to flood in low-lying areas, windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the torrential rain. By the time she pulled into her driveway, her hands were cramped from gripping the steering wheel so tightly. "Parker!" she called, pushing open the front door. "I'm home, honey!" Only silence greeted her. Sienna checked his bedroom, the bathroom, even looked under his bed where he sometimes hid during storms. Nothing. "Parker!" Her voice rose with panic. That's when she spotted the note on the kitchen table written in Parker's careful handwriting. "Mom, I read Mr. Reed's letter. He's my dad. I'm going to find him at the resort. Don't worry, I'll be careful. Love, Parker." The blood drained from Sienna's face. The resort was directly in the evacuation zone, right on the lakeshore where the storm would hit hardest. Without hesitation, she grabbed her keys and raced back to her car. The rain was coming down in sheets now, making it nearly impossible to see. Twice she had to detour around flooded roads, precious minutes ticking by as her panic mounted. At the resort, emergency preparations were in full swing. Charles directed staff as they secured outdoor furniture and boarded up windows. The guests had already been relocated to hotels further inland, leaving only essential personnel to weather the storm. "The West Wing is secure," reported one of the maintenance workers, shouting to be heard over the howling wind. Charles nodded, checking items off his clipboard. "What about—" He stopped mid-sentence as headlights cut through the rain. A car skidded to a halt, and Sienna leaped out, drenched within seconds. "Parker!" she screamed, running toward Charles. "He's here somewhere!" Despite everything that had happened between them, Charles recognized the terror in her eyes immediately. "What do you mean? Here at the resort?" "He found your letter," Sienna gasped, rain streaming down her face. "He left a note saying he was coming to find you." Charles felt his heart constrict. "When?" "I don't know. I just got home from work." Without another word, Charles turned to his security team. "We need to find a boy 8 years old. Check the security cameras now." They hurried inside to the security office where monitors displayed feeds from around the property. The security guard quickly rewound the footage. "There," Charles pointed, his finger tracing a small figure on one of the screens. "That's him." They watched as Parker, hood pulled up against the rain, made his way across the property and disappeared into the partially constructed new wing, the very section Charles had planned to redesign for Sienna's restaurant. "That area isn't safe," Charles said, his voice tight with fear. "Especially not during a storm. There's exposed wiring, unstable structures." A massive crash of thunder shook the building, and the security monitors flickered. Moments later, they went dark as the power failed. "The backup generator should kick in," the security guard said, but the screens remained blank. Or not. "I'm going to find him," Sienna declared, already moving toward the door. "Not alone," Charles said firmly, grabbing flashlights from a nearby emergency kit. "That wing is a maze of construction. I know the layout." Their eyes met for a brief moment, the first real look they'd shared since their confrontation. All the anger and hurt was still there, but something else too. A shared terror for their son. Charles handed Sienna a flashlight. "We'll find him." Together, they pushed through the storm toward the darkened wing of the resort, the wind threatening to knock them off their feet. Rain lashed at their faces as lightning illuminated the skeletal framework of the unfinished building. "Parker," they called in unison, their voices almost lost in the roar of the storm. As they entered the construction zone, the walls groaned around them. Water streamed through gaps in the temporary roofing, creating slick puddles on the concrete floor. "Stay close," Charles warned, taking Sienna's hand instinctively as they navigated through the darkness. This place wasn't built to withstand a storm like this. For the first time in weeks, Sienna didn't pull away from his touch. Their shared fear for Parker had created a temporary bridge across the chasm between them, a fragile connection forged in the face of potential tragedy. The storm unleashed its full fury as Charles and Sienna made their way deeper into the construction site. Wind howled through the exposed framework, creating an eerie whistling that sent chills down their spines. Water cascaded through gaps in the temporary roofing, turning the concrete floor into a treacherous surface. "Parker!" Sienna called out, her voice barely audible above the storm's rage. Charles swept his flashlight across the darkness, illuminating half-finished walls and dangling electrical wires. "We need to check the central area. That's where the main restaurant space was going to be." A sudden crack overhead made them both freeze. A section of temporary ceiling gave way, crashing down mere feet in front of them. Charles instinctively pulled Sienna back, sheltering her with his body. "This whole place could come down," he said, his voice tight with fear. not for himself, but for the small boy somewhere in this dangerous maze. They pressed on, moving more cautiously now. Each step was a gamble as the building creaked and groaned around them. "Parker!" Sienna called again, desperation edging her voice. Then, between thunderclaps, they heard it, a faint cry. "Mom, is that you?" "Parker!" They shouted in unison, following the sound to a partially collapsed section where the kitchen area had been planned. Their flashlights revealed a horrifying sight. A large support beam had fallen, bringing down part of the ceiling. Behind the debris, in a small pocket of space, they could just make out Parker's frightened face. "I'm stuck," he called, his voice trembling. "I can't get out." Sienna rushed forward, but Charles caught her arm. "Wait." He examined the precarious pile of debris. "It's not stable. More weight could bring everything down." "We can't just leave him there," Sienna said, panic rising in her voice. Charles assessed the situation with rapid calculation. "There's a small opening there," he pointed. "I can fit through." "Charles, no, it's too dangerous." "He's my son," Charles said simply, meeting her eyes with newfound determination. Without waiting for her response, Charles got down on his stomach and began to inch his way through the narrow passage between fallen beams and broken drywall. Sharp edges tore at his expensive shirt, but he barely noticed. His focus was entirely on the frightened boy waiting on the other side. The passage narrowed further, forcing Charles to flatten himself completely. A sudden shift in the debris sent dust and small fragments raining down on him. "Charles!" Sienna called from behind. "I'm okay," he grunted, pushing forward. Finally, he squeezed through to the small pocket where Parker was trapped. The boy's eyes were wide with fear, a small cut on his forehead, sending a trickle of blood down his cheek. "Mr. Reed," Parker whispered. "I'm here, Parker. I'm here." Charles moved to the boy's side, quickly assessing him for injuries. "Are you hurt anywhere else?" Parker shook his head. "Just scared. I wanted to find you, but then the storm got really bad and the ceiling started falling." Another ominous crack sounded above them. Without hesitation, Charles covered Parker with his body as more debris rained down. A sharp pain lanced through his shoulder as something heavy struck him, but he remained firmly positioned over his son. "It's okay," he murmured into Parker's hair. "I've got you." When the debris settled, Charles shifted slightly but maintained his protective position. "Why did you come looking for me in this storm, buddy?" "I read your letter," Parker said, his voice small. "Mom didn't give it to me. I found it in her drawer when I was looking for batteries for my flashlight." Charles swallowed hard. "I'm sorry you had to find out that way." "Are you really my dad?" "Yes," Charles answered, his voice thick with emotion. "I am." "Why weren't you ever there before?" The simple question hit Charles like a physical blow. "I didn't know about you, Parker, but that's no excuse. I should have been there. And I promise you this, I will never disappear from your life again. Never." Parker studied him with those serious blue eyes, so like his own. "Do you promise?" "With all my heart," Charles said, meaning it more than any promise he'd ever made. "From now on, I'll always be your dad." The building groaned around them, but in that moment, something solid and unshakable formed between father and son, a bond that even the raging storm couldn't touch. Eventually, the rescue team arrived, cutting through the debris to create a safe passage. As they emerged into the relative safety of the main building, Sienna rushed forward. What she saw stopped her in her tracks. Charles, bleeding from a cut on his shoulder, still had his arms wrapped protectively around Parker, their foreheads pressed together as if sharing a secret. In that moment, seeing Charles's protective embrace of their son, Sienna glimpsed something she had never expected to see: genuine love and commitment in the eyes of the man she'd once believed incapable of either. In the days following the storm, the town began the slow process of rebuilding. The lakeside resort had sustained significant damage, particularly in the construction zone where Parker had been trapped. Charles had suffered a deep cut on his shoulder requiring several stitches, but he considered it a small price to pay for his son's safety. Parker had escaped with only minor scrapes and bruises, his physical recovery quick. The emotional landscape, however, remained fragile for all three of them. On the third morning after the rescue, Charles called an emergency meeting with the resort's board of directors. He stood before them with bandaged shoulder and unwavering resolve. "I'm withdrawing my original renovation proposal," he announced, sliding folders across the polished table. "This is the new vision for Lakeside." The plans he presented preserved the resort's rustic charm while modernizing its amenities. At the center of his proposal was an expanded restaurant space, designed specifically around Sienna's culinary philosophy, with a teaching kitchen and garden-to-table concept. "This isn't just good business," Charles explained. "It's the right thing to do." Later that afternoon, he visited a small rental property near the lake, a modest two-bedroom cottage with a wraparound porch. It was nothing like the luxury accommodations he typically favored, but it was only a 5-minute walk from Sienna's home. The real estate agent looked surprised when he signed the 6-month lease on the spot. "I need to be close to my son," was all he said by way of explanation. Sienna was cautious when Charles presented his new plans for the restaurant, along with an offer to reinstate her as executive chef with complete creative control. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, arms crossed protectively over her chest as they sat at her kitchen table. Parker was in the next room, supposedly doing homework, but clearly straining to hear their conversation. "Because you were right about the restaurant, about the resort." Charles paused, choosing his words carefully. "And because I want to be part of Parker's life. That means being here, in this town, finding a way for all of us to move forward." They established boundaries, supervised visits at first, scheduled times when Charles could spend with Parker. Sienna maintained a careful distance, civil but reserved, the hurt from his public humiliation still raw. A week into this tentative arrangement, Charles arrived for his evening with Parker to find Sienna preparing ingredients for dinner. "Parker asked if we could all cook together," she explained, not quite meeting his eyes. "He says you told him about the time you worked in a restaurant kitchen during college." "Summer job," Charles confirmed, rolling up his sleeves. "I was a terrible line cook, but I learned a lot." Parker bounded into the kitchen, his face lighting up at the sight of Charles. "Dad, Mom's going to teach us how to make her famous lasagna." The word "dad" still felt new, precious. Charles caught Sienna's eye, silently asking if this was okay. She gave a small nod. What began awkwardly soon found its rhythm. Charles chopped vegetables while Sienna prepared the sauce, Parker moving between them, asking questions and sampling ingredients. Their movements around the small kitchen became synchronized, an unconscious dance as they passed utensils, tasted each other's preparations, and built the dish layer by layer. Just like that, Sienna guided Charles's hands as he arranged the pasta. Her fingers lingered on his for a moment longer than necessary, and the air between them shifted subtly. After dinner, Parker insisted Charles read him a bedtime story. By the time Charles emerged from the boy's bedroom, Parker was fast asleep. He found Sienna on the porch, 2 glasses of wine waiting. "He's out," Charles said, taking the offered seat beside her. "He feels safe with you," Sienna replied quietly. "I never expected that to happen so quickly." The night air was cool, scented with rain-washed earth and possibility. For several minutes they sat in silence, until Charles finally spoke. "I need to apologize properly," he said, "for not remembering that night in Miami, for not being there when you tried to find me, for how I treated you when I found out about Parker." Sienna studied her wine. "I should have told you as soon as you arrived in town." "Would you have eventually, if we hadn't?" He gestured vaguely between them. "Yes," she said without hesitation. Parker was asking questions. He deserved to know his father, and you deserved to know him. Charles turned to face her directly. "Where do we go from here, Sienna? For Parker's sake, we need to find a way forward, but I also can't pretend I don't still feel something for you." "I don't know," she admitted, finally meeting his gaze. "Trust isn't rebuilt overnight." "I'm not asking for overnight," he said softly. "I'm asking for a chance." 6 months passed in a steady rhythm of rebuilding, not just the resort, but trust, family bonds, and possibilities for the future. The Lakeside Resort's grand reopening was scheduled for tomorrow evening, with Sienna's reimagined restaurant, Harvest, as its crown jewel. The concept had evolved from her original vision into something even more personal, a celebration of local ingredients, family recipes, and sustainable practices that honored the community's heritage. Charles stood at the edge of the construction site, watching workers install the final touches on the restaurant's glass-walled dining room that overlooked both the lake and Sienna's new chef's garden. His phone buzzed with a text from Sienna. "Parker's science fair ended early. We're heading to the resort if you're free." A smile spread across his face. These small, everyday communications still gave him a rush of gratitude. He texted back immediately. "Meet you at the restaurant. Can't wait to see you both." In the past 6 months, Charles had quietly transformed his life around his newfound family. He'd attended every one of Parker's baseball games, sitting awkwardly on aluminum bleachers among parents who initially whispered about him, but gradually accepted his presence. He'd helped with science projects, learned to make Parker's favorite breakfast, and established a substantial college fund without fanfare or announcement. Sienna only discovered it when the paperwork arrived in the mail. Most importantly, he'd respected her boundaries. He remained in the lakeside cottage, close enough to be present in Parker's daily life, but giving Sienna the space she needed. Their relationship had evolved slowly, rebuilding from the foundation of co-parenting into something deeper. Movie nights that ended with lingering goodbyes at her door, family dinners that stretched into late-evening conversations after Parker went to bed, and gradual rediscovery of the connection that had sparked between them before everything fell apart. Charles spotted them approaching, Parker running ahead while Sienna followed at a more measured pace. At 9 years old now, Parker had grown an inch in the past months, his face thinning slightly to reveal even more of Charles's features. "Dad! Mr. Wilson let me ring the bell in the new lobby!" Parker exclaimed, crashing into Charles with the full-body hug that still caught him by surprise every time. "Careful with your father's suit," Sienna cautioned, her eyes meeting Charles's with warmth that had slowly replaced the wariness of months past. "It's just a suit," Charles replied, wrapping one arm around Parker while extending the other toward Sienna. After a moment's hesitation, a habit she hadn't fully shed, she stepped into his embrace. They toured the nearly completed restaurant together, Parker racing ahead to examine each new feature while Charles and Sienna followed, their hands occasionally brushing against each other. "I can hardly believe it's the same space," Sienna admitted, running her fingers along the custom-built chef's table that would allow guests to watch her work. "When you first arrived in town, I was so afraid you'd destroy everything I'd built. Instead, you changed everything I thought I wanted," Charles replied quietly. Later that evening, after they'd dropped Parker off with Charles's grandmother Eleonora for a sleepover, Charles drove Sienna to the lakeside pier. The night was clear, stars reflected in the still water below them. It was the same spot where they'd shared their first kiss nearly 7 months ago, before revelations and storms had torn them apart. "I thought we might take a walk," he suggested, offering his hand. Sienna took it, her fingers intertwining with his naturally now. "Nervous about tomorrow's opening?" "Terrified," he admitted with a laugh, "but not about the resort." They walked to the end of the pier where Charles had arranged a small setup, a blanket, a bottle of wine, and a lantern casting soft light. Sienna raised an eyebrow. "Very romantic, Mr. Reed." "I'm trying," he said, his voice suddenly serious. They sat together, looking out at the water. Charles poured 2 glasses of wine, then took a deep breath. When I came back to this town, I thought I knew exactly what I wanted. Success meant acquiring properties, expanding my portfolio, building my empire. He shook his head. I had everything I thought mattered, and it turned out I had nothing that actually did. Sienna watched him carefully, her expression soft in the lantern light. Finding you again, meeting Parker, it changed everything. For the first time, I understood what it meant to be part of something bigger than myself. Something real. His voice grew husky with emotion. These past 6 months have been the most challenging of my life, but also the most meaningful. You've proven yourself, Sienna said quietly. To Parker. To me. Charles reached into his pocket, withdrawing not a jewelry box as might be expected, but a simple brass key tied with a blue ribbon. This isn't an engagement ring, he said, holding it out to her. That can come when you're ready, if you're ever ready. This is a key to a home I bought. Not a mansion or penthouse, but a house by the lake with a big kitchen and a yard where Parker can play. A place I hope someday we might share as a family, whenever you feel it's right. Tears glistened in Sienna's eyes as she took the key, turning it over in her fingers. I don't need grand gestures or expensive gifts, Charles continued. I just want a life with you and Parker. I want breakfast conversations and homework help and family dinners. I want to build something real with you, Sienna. Charles, she whispered, her voice catching. I love you, he said simply. I love our son, and I'll wait as long as it takes for you to be ready for us to be a family in every sense. Sienna closed her fingers around the key, then reached for him, drawing him closer until their foreheads touched. I love you too, she said, and I think I'm ready to try. Their lips met in a kiss that felt both familiar and entirely new, a beginning rather than a reclaiming of what was lost. Neither noticed the small figure watching from the shoreline, where Eleonora had brought Parker for an evening walk. See? The older woman whispered to her great-grandson. I told you they just needed time. Parker smiled, watching his parents embrace beneath the stars, his family finally whole. If you enjoyed this story, I've found another special one just for you. Our community can't stop talking about how heartwarming and moving it is. Click on the video in front of you to experience this beautiful story before it's gone.